Still enjoying the $5,000 every month, Mom? My son asked with a warm smile as he wrapped his arms around me beside the 12-foot Christmas tree glowing in the center of his mansion. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. The music from the string quartet drifted softly through the room while guests laughed around crystal glasses and silver serving trays. But all I could hear were those words repeating inside my head. $5,000 a month. My fingers tightened around the paper cup of coffee I'd been nursing all evening because I didn't want anyone noticing that my hands shook more these days in the cold. "I'm sorry," I asked quietly, looking up at Ethan's face. My son chuckled softly, like he thought I was teasing him. "The monthly transfers, Mom. You finally spending some of it on yourself?" His smile was relaxed, proud even. The kind of smile a son gives when he believes he's done right by his mother. And standing just behind him near the fireplace, Vanessa suddenly stopped moving. Her champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. It lasted less than a second. Most people wouldn't have noticed it. But I did. At 68, after raising a family and surviving 39 years of marriage before burying my husband, you learn to notice the tiny moments people try to hide. I looked at Ethan again. My little boy who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard and cry whenever he scraped his knees. He was 40 now. Successful. Handsome. The owner of one of the biggest luxury real estate firms in Connecticut. His tailored charcoal suit probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. And yet somehow, my roof had still leaked during last month's snowstorm. I had still spent 2 nights sleeping under 3 blankets because I was trying to save money on heating oil. I had still stood in the pharmacy aisle 3 weeks ago deciding whether I could afford both my blood pressure medication and the arthritis cream for my hands. $5,000 a month. "Mom," Ethan asked again, concern flickering across his face now. "You okay?" I forced a smile that felt stiff against my cheeks. "Of course, sweetheart. I think I'm just tired." Vanessa appeared beside him almost instantly, elegant in a cream-colored velvet dress with diamond earrings that sparkled against the Christmas lights. She slipped one manicured hand around Ethan's arm before speaking. "Margaret's probably overwhelmed," she said lightly. "It's been such a busy night." Her voice sounded smooth, polished, perfectly controlled. But her eyes never met mine. Not once. Instead, she reached for Ethan's sleeve again, subtle but firm, like she was trying to guide him away from me. That was when something cold settled deep in my stomach. Not anger. Not yet. Something quieter. Something heavier. Because Ethan looked genuinely confused by my reaction, which meant he believed every word he'd just said. Somewhere over the past few years, while I was clipping coupons at my kitchen table and wearing the same winter coat until the lining frayed at the sleeves, someone had convinced my son that I was living comfortably. Someone had made sure he never saw the truth. Across the room, children laughed near the staircase while snow drifted softly outside the enormous bay windows. The whole house smelled like cinnamon candles and pine garland. It should have felt warm. Instead, for the first time since arriving at the party, I felt cold all the way to my bones. Vanessa finally looked at me then, just for a second, and in that second, I saw it. Fear. I stayed at the party for another hour after that conversation, smiling when people smiled at me and nodding politely whenever someone complimented the decorations or the catered dinner. But the warmth I had felt when I first walked into Ethan's house was gone. Every laugh now sounded distant. Every Christmas song drifting through the speakers felt strangely hollow. I kept replaying his words in my mind while I watched Vanessa move through the room greeting guests with effortless grace, her hand always resting lightly on Ethan's arm, as if she needed constant reassurance that she still controlled the space around him. Once or twice, I caught her glancing toward me. Quick little looks filled with calculation. Fear had flashed across her face earlier, but now she seemed calmer, almost like she was convincing herself she could still manage whatever damage had just been done. By the time I finally stepped outside, snow had begun collecting along the edges of the long stone driveway. The cold air hit my lungs sharply as I pulled my old wool coat tighter around myself. My car heater barely worked anymore, so I drove home with gloves on, my fingers stiff against the steering wheel while soft flakes drifted through the headlights. The town looked beautiful at Christmas. Small white lights wrapped around lamp posts. Storefront windows decorated with garland and ribbon. Families walking together carrying shopping bags and cups of hot chocolate. For a moment, I remembered how much Daniel used to love this season. My husband never cared much about expensive gifts. He loved simple things. fresh pine, old jazz records, cinnamon rolls on Christmas morning, the sound of family filling the house. After he died 4 years ago, the silence inside our home changed everything. Grief does that. It reshapes rooms. It changes the sound of your own footsteps. At first, Ethan called almost every day, then every week, then only on holidays or birthdays. I never blamed him for it. He had built a massive company before turning 40. Meetings, investors, flights to Chicago and Los Angeles and Miami. His life moved faster than mine now. That is what I told myself whenever another month passed without seeing him. I parked beside my small white house and sat there for a moment staring at the porch light flickering weakly against the snow. The roof still needed repairs near the gutters. I had been setting aside a little money each month to fix it before the heavier winter storms arrived. Inside, the house was cold enough that I could see my breath faintly when I opened the front door. I turned the thermostat up only 2 degrees. Heating oil had gotten too expensive lately. The kitchen smelled faintly like peppermint tea and the vegetable soup I had made 3 nights ago. I stood quietly in the darkness for a long time before finally walking toward the small desk beside the hallway where I kept my bills stacked in neat little piles. Electric, water, prescription costs, insurance, every month, carefully balanced down to the dollar. Slowly, I opened my bank account notebook and stared at the numbers written across the pages in my own careful handwriting. Nothing had changed. No mysterious deposits. No hidden savings. No monthly transfers. Just enough money to survive if I stayed careful. My chest tightened as I realized something that hurt far worse than the missing money itself. Ethan truly believed he had been taking care of me all these years, which meant someone had made sure my son never saw how close I had come to struggling alone. The next morning, I woke before sunrise to the sound of wind rattling softly against the kitchen windows. For a few seconds, I forgot about the conversation at Ethan's party. Then the memory returned all at once, heavy and sharp enough to make my chest ache before my feet even touched the floor. I wrapped my robe tighter around myself and walked slowly into the kitchen, switching on the small light above the stove. The clock on the microwave read 6:14. Outside, the world was still dark blue with winter. Snow covered the yard in a smooth, untouched blanket, and the old maple tree near the driveway bent slightly beneath the weight of ice. I filled the kettle with water and stood quietly while it heated, staring at the stack of unopened mail beside the toaster. Bills mostly. Grocery coupons. A church newsletter. Nothing unusual. At least, that was what I had believed for years. But now every little thing felt different. I kept hearing Ethan's voice in my mind. The confidence in it. The certainty. He had not been lying to me. That was the part one could not stop thinking about. My son truly believed he had been helping me, which meant someone else had been standing between us for a very long time. I carried my tea into the living room and sat in Daniel's old recliner near the window. The chair still smelled faintly like cedar after all these years. Sometimes late at night, when the house got too quiet, I would sit there just to feel close to him again. Daniel used to handle every financial detail in our marriage. Retirement accounts, insurance policies, property taxes. He liked systems and folders and labels. I liked cooking Sunday dinners and making sure the house felt warm whenever Ethan brought friends home from school. After Daniel passed away from his heart attack, I tried learning everything myself, but grief fogs the mind in strange ways. There were days I could barely remember whether I had eaten lunch. Days when opening a bank statement felt impossible because seeing only one name on the account still hurt too much. Vanessa had stepped in quickly after the funeral. Too quickly, maybe. At the time, I thought she was trying to help. She offered to organize paperwork, forward important documents, simplify things for me. You should not stress yourself with all this at your age, she had said gently while placing color-coded folders across my dining table. Ethan agreed with her. He always agreed with her lately. I remember feeling grateful back then, relieved, even. Now that memory made my stomach tighten. Slowly, I set my tea down and walked into the hallway closet where I kept old storage boxes stacked near the vacuum cleaner. Dust floated through the air as I pulled one box down onto the floor. Inside were years of papers, tax forms, insurance renewals, old Christmas cards. I spent nearly 2 hours sitting cross-legged on the rug sorting through everything while morning light slowly filled the house. Most of it was ordinary. Then I found a thin white envelope tucked between 2 folders near the bottom of the box. It had never been opened. My name was printed neatly across the front beside the logo of Ethan's financial firm. My heartbeat slowed strangely as I slid one finger beneath the seal. Inside was a notice dated nearly 3 years earlier confirming a change of mailing address request for several financial communications connected to family trust distributions. I read the forwarding address twice before my hands started trembling. The address belonged to Ethan and Vanessa's home. I sat there for a long time staring at the paper in my hands while the radiator clicked softly somewhere behind me. Outside, snow continued falling in slow, quiet waves across the neighborhood, covering the sidewalks and rooftops in white. Everything looked peaceful, but inside me, something had started shifting. I read the forwarding notice again carefully, paying attention to every detail this time. The request had been submitted electronically 38 months earlier, authorized through a verified family account. Temporary forwarding, it claimed. Only there was nothing temporary about nearly 4 years. My throat tightened as memories began surfacing one after another, small moments I had ignored because I trusted my family. Vanessa insisting she would help simplify my paperwork after Daniel died. Vanessa encouraging me to stop checking online statements because technology only causes stress. Vanessa casually offering to collect my mail whenever I traveled to Vermont for church retreats. At the time, all of it had sounded thoughtful, caring, even. I had never once considered another possibility. Slowly, I opened the old box further and searched through the remaining folders with new eyes. Not as a grieving widow sorting clutter, as someone looking for evidence. Within minutes, I found 2 more unopened envelopes from Ethan's company buried beneath old insurance documents. One referenced annual trust distributions. Another mentioned account updates requiring signature confirmation. Neither had ever reached me. My hands started trembling harder now. I stood up too quickly and had to steady myself against the dining room table while a wave of dizziness passed through me. The room suddenly felt warmer than before, heavy with a pressure I could not explain. I walked into the bathroom and splashed cold water against my face, staring at my reflection in the mirror afterward. The woman looking back at me seemed older than 68. Thin silver hair pulled loosely back, tired blue eyes, skin worn from years of winter air and worry. I wondered what Ethan would think if he saw me clearly now. Not the version someone had carefully described to him. The real version. The mother clipping grocery coupons under weak kitchen light. The mother delaying dental appointments because insurance no longer covered enough. The mother sitting alone through most evenings with only an old radio humming softly in the background. Back in the living room, I picked up my phone twice before setting it down again. Part of me wanted to call Ethan immediately and demand answers. But another part remembered Vanessa's expression at the Christmas party. That flash of fear had not belonged to someone caught in a misunderstanding. It belonged to someone afraid of being exposed. I knew enough about money to understand that people rarely steal once. They build systems around it. Careful little habits. Quiet manipulations that grow larger over time because no one notices soon enough. By noon, the snow outside had thickened into heavy white sheets drifting across the road. I heated a bowl of leftover soup but barely touched it. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table writing dates down in a small notebook beside the envelopes. 38 months. $5,000 each month. Nearly $200,000. The number made me physically ill. Not because of the money itself. Daniel and I had never cared much about luxury. But because Ethan believed every dollar had been helping me survive while I had spent years trying not to become a burden to him. My eyes drifted toward the family photo hanging near the refrigerator. Ethan stood between Daniel and me in that picture, smiling proudly in his college graduation robe, while Vanessa leaned beside him with one hand resting gently on his shoulder. I remember thinking that day how lucky I was that my son had found such a polished, intelligent woman to build a life with. Looking at that photograph now, I noticed something I had never seen before. Vanessa was not looking at the camera. She was looking at Ethan. 3 days passed before anything else happened. 3 quiet winter days filled with snow, unanswered questions, and a strange heaviness that followed me from room to room like a shadow. I did not call Ethan. I did not mention the envelopes to anyone. Instead, I watched. I paid attention to things I would normally ignore. The missing pieces of my life no longer felt random now. They felt arranged, deliberate. On the 4th morning, I was standing at the kitchen sink washing a coffee cup when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. For a second, I almost ignored it. Lately, Most unknown calls were telemarketers or medical billing reminders. But something made me answer anyway. Mrs. Holloway, a woman asked carefully. Her voice sounded nervous, almost hesitant. This is Claire Benton. I used to work for Ethan. I frowned slightly, trying to place the name. Then I remembered. Tall brunette. Always carrying a tablet during Ethan's charity events. Quiet but efficient. I had met her twice at family dinners years ago. Yes, I said slowly. I remember you. There was a pause on the line. I think we need to talk, she said softly. An hour later, Claire sat across from me at my kitchen table wrapped in a dark wool coat, her hands curled tightly around a mug of tea. Snowflakes melted slowly in her hair from the walk up my driveway. Up close, she looked exhausted. Not physically tired exactly. More like someone who had spent too long carrying something heavy alone. I am sorry to come here like this, she said quietly. But after the Christmas party, I realized Vanessa made a mistake. My chest tightened. What kind of mistake? Claire looked down at the steam rising from her cup before answering. She never expected Ethan to mention the transfers in front of you. Silence filled the kitchen. The old wall clock ticked steadily behind us while wind brushed softly against the windows. Claire finally reached into her leather bag and pulled out a thin manila folder. I worked as Ethan's senior financial coordinator for 6 years, she explained. Most of his personal accounts passed through our office at some point. About 4 years ago, he instructed us to create monthly support transfers for you after your husband passed away. My throat felt dry suddenly. $5,000? She nodded once. Every month. Automatically scheduled. I stared at the folder in front of me without touching it. Then where did the money go? Claire hesitated. I noticed the exact moment she chose honesty over comfort. Vanessa redirected the correspondence first, she said quietly. Then she convinced Ethan that she was helping manage the distributions for you personally. My stomach turned cold. Claire continued carefully, like she understood each word. Carried weight. At first I thought maybe there was a misunderstanding between the two of you. But eventually I noticed inconsistencies. Shell accounts. Transfers moved between holding companies connected to Vanessa's consulting business. Every time I raised concerns, she explained them away. And Ethan? I whispered. Claire's expression softened with something close to pity. Your son trusted her completely. I looked toward the snowy backyard outside my kitchen window. The bird feeder Daniel built years ago leaned slightly under the ice. Everything suddenly felt painfully clear. Vanessa had not stolen from Ethan. She had stolen through him. Claire slowly pushed the folder across the table toward me. There is more, she said. The money was only the beginning. My fingers trembled as I opened the folder and saw copies of property discussions, trust summaries, and internal notes referencing assisted living consultations beside my name. For several seconds, I could not speak. I simply stared at the papers spread across my kitchen table while the tea beside me slowly turned cold. Assisted living consultations. Property evaluations. Internal notes discussing the possible liquidation of Daniel's Vermont ranch after primary family transition planning. My fingers tightened around the edge of one document as I read that phrase again. Primary family transition planning. Such clean words for something so cruel. Claire sat quietly across from me, giving me space to absorb it all. I appreciated that. Too many people rush to fill silence when they become uncomfortable. But silence tells the truth if you let it sit long enough. The ranch is in a protected family trust. I finally said softly. Daniel made sure of that before he died. Claire nodded carefully. Yes, but according to these discussions, Vanessa believed she could eventually persuade Ethan to move the property into a different structure once your health declined further. I almost laughed at that. Not because it was funny, because the sentence sounded so cold and professional while describing the slow removal of a person from her own life. My health declined further, as if I were an inconvenience being, measured on a spreadsheet. Outside the kitchen window, snow slid softly from the roof in thick white sheets. The sound startled me slightly. Everything felt sharper now, clearer, like someone had finally cleaned fog from a window I had been staring through for years. I thought about every time Vanessa had encouraged me to downsize. Every gentle suggestion about retirement communities with fitness centers and nurses nearby. Every conversation that sounded caring on the surface while quietly pushing me further away from the life Daniel and I built together. And through all of it, Ethan had trusted her. That was the part that hurt most. Not the money, not even the manipulation. It was the realization that my son no longer knew how to recognize loneliness in his own mother. Claire reached carefully into her bag again and slid another envelope toward me. I debated for months whether to bring this to you, she admitted quietly. I left the company because I could not keep pretending everything was normal. Inside the envelope were copies of internal emails. Vanessa discussing timelines. Vanessa asking about trust access. Vanessa referring to me as emotionally fragile and unlikely to manage independent finances much longer. One sentence made my chest tighten so sharply I had to close my eyes for a moment. If Margaret transitions smoothly into assisted care within the next 12 months, Ethan will eventually stop questioning the property restructuring. I set the papers down slowly. My hands no longer trembled now. Oddly enough, I felt calmer than before. Not safer, not happier, just clearer. There is a point when pain stops feeling confusing and starts becoming precise. I looked at Claire across the table. Does Ethan know any of this? She shook her head immediately. No. I truly believe he thinks every decision has been for your benefit. I believe that too, which was exactly why I understood something important in that moment. If I confronted Vanessa immediately, she would find a way to twist everything before Ethan saw the truth clearly. People like her survive through control, through narrative, through appearing calm while everyone else looks emotional. No, I needed patience now. Careful patience. I folded the papers neatly back into the envelope and stood up slowly from the table. Claire watched me with concern. What are you going to do? She asked softly. I looked toward the hallway where Daniel's old winter coat still hung beside the front door exactly where he left it years ago. Then I turned back toward her. For now, I said quietly, I am going to let Vanessa believe her plan is still working. The days after Claire's visit settled into a strange kind of routine. On the surface, nothing changed. I still woke before sunrise. Still fed the birds outside the kitchen window. Still folded blankets in the living room each evening before bed. But underneath those small, ordinary habits, something inside me had become alert. Careful. I started paying attention the way Daniel used to when he suspected a contractor was overcharging or a salesman was hiding details in fine print. Quiet observation. Patience before action. Vanessa called me twice that week. Her voice sounded sweeter than usual. Too sweet. How are you feeling after the holiday excitement? She asked lightly during the first call. You seemed a little tired at the party. I smiled to myself while standing at the sink rinsing dishes. I am fine, dear, I answered gently. Just getting older, I suppose. There was a tiny pause on the line before she responded. Well, Ethan and I have been talking. We really think it might be time to start considering easier living arrangements for you eventually. Somewhere with more support. There it was again. Careful wording wrapped in concern. Easier living arrangements. I glanced around my kitchen while she spoke. The yellow curtains I had sewn 20 years ago still hung over the window. Daniel's coffee mug still sat on the shelf beside mine. Every scratch in the hardwood floor carried a memory attached to it. This house was not just property. It was my life. That is thoughtful, I replied calmly. Maybe after winter passes we can talk more. Vanessa sounded relieved by my answer. Almost pleased. That told me everything I needed to know. 2 nights later, Ethan stopped by unexpectedly after work. Snow-covered. The shoulders of his dark wool coat when I opened the door. For a second, seeing him standing there with tired eyes and flushed cheeks from the cold made my heart ache with love, so sudden it nearly overwhelmed everything else. No matter how old your child becomes, part of you still sees the little boy underneath. I was nearby after a meeting, he said warmly as he stepped inside. Thought I would check on you. I made him coffee while he sat at the kitchen table scrolling through emails on his phone between conversations. The sight of it hurt more than I expected. Even here, in his mother's house, the world still pulled his attention away every few seconds. The heater working okay? He asked absently. Yes. Roof holding up after the storm? Mostly. He nodded without really looking up. Then suddenly he froze. His eyes lifted slowly toward the ceiling near the hallway where a faint brown water stain had spread along the plaster. Small, but noticeable. Ethan stared at it for several seconds. Mom, he said quietly, when did that happen? I wiped my hands carefully on a dish towel before answering. A while ago. His forehead tightened. Why did you not call me? Because I thought you were too busy. Because I did not want to become another responsibility on your list. Because somewhere along the way, your wife convinced both of us that I was already being taken care of. but I only smiled gently instead. It is nothing urgent. Ethan leaned back slowly in his chair, looking around the kitchen now as though seeing parts of it for the first time. The old refrigerator humming loudly in the corner. The worn flooring near the stove. The draft slipping faintly through the back door frame. I watched confusion begin forming quietly behind his eyes. Not suspicion yet, but discomfort. The first crack in the version of reality someone had carefully built for him. Then his phone buzzed. Vanessa's name appeared across the screen. And just like that, his attention disappeared again. New Year's Eve arrived wrapped in gray skies and freezing rain that glazed the streets in thin sheets of ice. By late afternoon, my house smelled like rosemary chicken and fresh dinner rolls. Warming in the oven. I moved slowly around the kitchen, setting the table for 4 people while soft jazz played from the old radio near the sink. The dining room looked smaller than Ethan's mansion, smaller than the glittering parties Vanessa loved hosting, but it felt warmer somehow. Real warmth does not come from chandeliers or marble floors. It comes from memory, from years of laughter settling into walls and furniture until a house starts breathing like family. At 6:15, headlights swept across the front windows. Ethan and Vanessa arrived together carrying a bottle of expensive wine and a bakery box tied with gold ribbon. Vanessa kissed my cheek lightly the moment she walked in. "The house looks lovely," she said smoothly while removing her gloves. Her eyes moved quickly across the room afterward, scanning everything the way they always did now. Looking for changes. Looking for control. Ethan hugged me longer than usual. "Smells incredible in here," he said with a tired smile. There were dark circles under his eyes tonight. I noticed that immediately. Something restless had started growing inside him since his visit earlier that week. During dinner, conversation stayed light at first. Weather, business, holiday traffic. Vanessa talked about a charity gala planned for February while Ethan barely touched his food. Several times I caught him glancing toward the water stain near the hallway ceiling again. It bothered him now. Good. Sometimes truth begins with tiny discomforts people can no longer ignore. After dessert, I stood slowly and walked into the living room where I had placed several folders neatly beside Daniel's old record player. My heart remained strangely calm. I had imagined this moment dozens of times over the past week, but now that it had arrived, I felt only clarity. "Before midnight," I said softly, "there is something important I would like us to discuss." Vanessa's smile flickered slightly. Ethan looked confused but nodded. I handed the first folder directly to him. "Open it." He frowned lightly before pulling out the papers inside. At first, his expression remained neutral. Then slowly, line by line, the color began draining from his face. Monthly transfer confirmations, bank routing summaries, distribution records, for years of $5,000 payments sent from his accounts. "Mom," he said quietly, looking up at me, "these are the support payments." "Yes," I answered gently. "The ones you believed I was receiving." Silence settled heavily across the room. Rain tapped softly against the windows while the grandfather clock near the staircase ticked louder than usual in the stillness. Ethan turned pages faster now. Confusion sharpened into alarm. "What is this?" he asked hoarsely. "Why are there forwarding notices attached?" I did not answer immediately. Instead, I placed the second folder onto the coffee table in front of Vanessa. For the first time since I had known her, she looked genuinely shaken. Her hand stayed perfectly still in her lap, but I noticed the tiny pulse jumping rapidly in her throat. "Go ahead," I said quietly. "You should read those too." Ethan opened the second folder before she could touch it. The room changed after that. I could feel it happening. The careful illusion Vanessa had built around my son for years started cracking open piece by piece with every document he read. Internal emails, property discussions, assisted living consultations beside my name. Notes referencing trust restructuring after family transition. Ethan stared at the pages as though he no longer recognized the words in front of him. "Vanessa," he whispered finally, "what is this?" She opened her mouth immediately. Too quickly. "Ethan, this is not what it looks like." But her voice no longer sounded polished. It sounded afraid. And for the first time in years, my son looked at his wife the same way I had started looking at her on Christmas night. No one spoke for a very long time after that. Ethan remained standing beside the coffee table with the papers still in his hands, while Vanessa sat frozen on the couch beneath the soft glow of the Christmas lights I had not taken down yet. Outside, Midnight fireworks had started somewhere across town, distant flashes of color briefly lighting the rain-streaked windows. But inside my living room, everything felt still. Ethan looked different now, older somehow, like the man standing in front of me had suddenly caught up to years of truth all at once. "Tell me this is not real," he said quietly to Vanessa. His voice did not rise. That was what made it so painful to hear. Vanessa swallowed hard before speaking. "Ethan, I can explain." He gave a slow shake of his head. "No," he whispered. "You can start by telling me why my mother was living like this while you let me believe she was being cared for." Tears filled Vanessa's eyes almost instantly, but something about them felt rehearsed now. Familiar. "I was trying to protect our future," she said softly. "You were constantly. You trust people too easily. I handled things the way I thought was best for our family." Our family. I noticed she still said it that way, even now, as though family were something she owned instead of something built with love and honesty. Ethan looked down at the papers again. "You stole from my mother." "No," Vanessa said quickly. "I moved money temporarily. I planned to fix everything before you ever noticed." Ethan laughed once under his breath then, but there was no humor in it, only disbelief. "For years," he said quietly. 4 years, and she was rationing medication while I thought she was comfortable. His eyes moved toward me then, and the look on his face nearly broke my heart. "Shame. Real shame." "Mom," he said softly, "why did you never tell me?" I held his gaze for a moment before answering. "Because every time I saw you, you already looked exhausted. And because I thought if I needed too much from you, I might lose what little time I still had with my son." Ethan closed his eyes briefly after that. Vanessa tried speaking again, but this time he raised one hand gently without looking at her. "Please stop talking for a minute." The room fell quiet except for the rain outside. I realized then that anger was no longer the strongest feeling inside me. Sadness was. Not sadness for the money or even for myself. Sadness for how easily distance can grow inside families when people stop paying attention to one another. By February, Vanessa had moved out of the house she once controlled so carefully. Lawyers became involved after. Ethan uncovered additional accounts connected to the transfers. Claire's records helped recover most of the money, though I discovered I no longer cared very much about getting it back. Some losses are not financial. Some losses are years. Trust. Missed moments you can never fully return to. Early the following winter, I drove north to Vermont alone and spent 3 quiet days at Daniel's old ranch beside the frozen lake. Snow covered the dock where Ethan used to fish as a boy, while Daniel grilled hamburgers nearby wearing that ridiculous red flannel hat he loved so much. The cabin was smaller than I remembered. Simpler too. But standing there with cold air filling my lungs, I felt something I had not felt in years. Peace. On Christmas Eve, just after sunset, headlights appeared slowly through the falling snow outside the cabin window. Ethan stepped out of the truck alone, carrying 2 paper grocery bags, and looking strangely uncertain, standing there in the cold. When I opened the door, neither of us spoke immediately. Then finally he held up one of the bags slightly and gave me the smallest tired smile. "I brought cinnamon rolls," he said softly. "The kind Dad used to make." I looked at my son standing there in the snow, older now, quieter somehow, and I understood something important. Money can repair accounts. Lawyers can untangle fraud. But rebuilding family takes something far more difficult. It takes people willing to finally see each other clearly.